How's everybody doing this afternoon? Very good. Yeah, this conference is awesome. This is my first time at SAINTCON. My team came last year, like, Tim, you've got to check this thing out. This thing is huge. It was like the little conference that I didn't know about, even though I think it's like the biggest conference that I can think of that isn't DEF CON, that isn't in Las Vegas. Like, this thing is, and RSA doesn't count because that's just sales. Yeah, love it. Love Salt Lake City, even though I just realized last night that I'm actually an hour away from Salt Lake City. So catching my flight in a couple hours is going to be a little bit more interesting with traffic and such. But that's the adventures, right? Cool. And with that, let's get rolling. My name is Tim Medin. I'm going to talk today. My background, I've been doing pen testing, offensive things for 15 years or something like that. Been teaching for a dozen years or so. Yeah, with that, let's get rolling. So I'm going to talk through offense for defense. Who in the room? Shout out if you are on the defensive side, if you are blue. That I said shout. Yes. Simon says, yeah. How about any offensive people? Yeah, there's only 3 of them, but I'll get bonus points for the noise. How about, I don't know, pink team? Who's the managers? Notice silence. All right. Anybody in sales? You had auditors? A few of you had to raise your hand at all. Like, are you at the right conference? Were you trying to go to? Anyway, cool. Let's get rolling here. So I do offensive things, have been doing offensive things, worked in security for even longer. And I find that the best red teamers, and if you're not familiar with the red and blue, comes from the military. The blue is the team that you're testing, trying to see how they respond, how they react. The red is the one that is, well, the term I use is stimulate, causing the action by the blue. So I'm the red team, right? I'm trying to figure out, is the blue team doing their job correctly? And if not, help out. Any of you blue teamers, you don't have to raise your hand if your boss is around. Interested in getting into the red team side of things at all? Couple of hands. All right, cool. You don't have to shout out either. Okay. Yeah, but I find that the best red teamers have a blue background. I also find some of the best defenders have some good offensive knowledge. In fact, this is just a good life principle that more knowledge, broader knowledge on a subject makes you so much better. Any of you ever read the book Snow Crash? Phenomenal book. It's one of the opening paragraph or whatever the words are there. This one sticks with me. I can't really repeat. But the short version is he was trying to be the world's best at something, and he realized that somebody else was already at that spot, and it made him feel good. Right? I like to be the best at what I am, but I realize that there's always someone better. I can be better if I'm 75% good at 2 things. Now I'm a unicorn. If I'm 75% good at 3 things, like, I don't know, what's another mythical creature, right? So getting that broader knowledge makes you so much more well-rounded. And if you folks like money, right? We should hang out if you do, right? It makes you more employable, more cool jobs and such here. Now, sorry for the handful of red folks here. You can cover your ears. We're not special. It's sad. My mom told me I was, and I recently came to the conclusion that I'm not. And by that I mean our sole job is to help make the defenders better. To take another step further, to keep the real bad guys out of the organization. And if we fail to do that, if we fail to identify the issues, provide actionable feedback, to some degree sell them on, look, this is the right thing to do and it's important and it's urgent or whatever it might be, those are a lot of the things that we have to do as some of the offensive folks. It's also important to remember red and blue work together. We're not enemies. Red is here to make blue better. And it's a lot better if you blue teamers can help make the rest of us better as well. And these failures in security, it's not, a failure like the ransomware kicked in. This is a failure that, hey, cool, we're in a safe space, a safe environment, and we can learn from it. It's like sparring if you do karate or any of the other infinite named MMA type things, right? You practice. You're not going full speed, getting punched in the nose, but you learn how to dodge and react, right? I have spent way too much time looking at the Verizon data breach report. Anybody else? Yeah, there's no cheering on that one. That's just sad, right? It's like, I swear every year it gets 10 pages longer. And if you look at the Verizon breach report, the biggest way that the bad guys are getting in, leaked credentials and phishing. And realistically, a lot of the phishing leads to these stolen or reused credentials. And the fundamental problem is, well, passwords suck, right? It's easy. It's super easy to do. Well, by the way, I forgot to mention it. All the slides are available at redsiege.com/O4D, so you don't have to take pictures. You can if you want. I'll pose for you. It's awesome. But passwords are terrible. And we see time and time again the breaches, right? I get so many breach notifications where I'm like, I don't know. It's almost like I just want to count and see how I can get up to this here. Like I don't even care anymore because I'm like, well, it's all out there. It's all leaked. It's just kind of gone. One of the big things that we see are things like credential stuffing. How many of you, reluctantly, have a crappy Facebook account, aka LinkedIn? Right? We all got LinkedIn accounts because we need a place that's not Facebook, right? So, and this happens with any place. I'm not trying to pick on LinkedIn, but we sign up, and some people use their work email address, which, by the way, terrible idea. And then, for example, LinkedIn was breached in 2021. What the bad guys did is they took those password hashes that were properly hashed, and they cracked them. Well, now they have the email address, and they have the password. And if it's your company's email address, they know immediately where to try to use that password. A lot of us also know this as from our family members of someone hacked my Netflix. Right? The someone hacked my Netflix isn't that someone actually hacked their Netflix in like some cool high-tech thing. It's, no, mom reused her secure password for the 7,000th time. Right? So we see this kind of thing. And as an attacker, how many credentials do I need to get that initial foothold in the organization? I just gave away the answer, but one, right? I just need one. I just need a single one to get the foothold to start the lateral movement. And maybe I don't even have to do the lateral movement. We'll talk about some of that in a little bit here. So some tips. What I'm going to do in this talk, and I only have an hour. Man, any of you remember like in high school when you had to give a 3-minute speech? And it was the worst thing of your entire life? You're like, I could run away. And now I'm like, man, I only have 60 minutes. Like, what am I going to cram in here? Apparently it's stories about high school. But so try to crack some of these passwords. Look for some of these terrible passwords. What are some of those terrible passwords? Well, first up, how often, according to auditors, we have no auditors in the room, so we can pick on them. According to auditors, and I'm being very careful with my wording, how often are we supposed to change passwords? 90 days, right? Oh, hold on, stop. No, I didn't say according to modern recommendations. I said according to auditors. I chose my words very carefully here because some of us still have to follow the policy, even though we're like, the policy's wrong. And we're like, we don't care. We have to follow it. Why? I don't know. Right? We have to change every 90 days. You know why it's 90 days? That's as far as they can remember, yeah? No, I don't know if you know, but when Moses came down from the mountain, there was the third tablet. No, my money is, it was two dudes. I'm going to blame it on two dudes. Two dudes in an office who were like, how often should we change passwords? And they're like, I don't know. How about 4 times a year? Okay, cool. How many days is that? Now, these two dudes are not good at math. Right? 365 divided by 4. I don't know. I think it's 90. Right? So now we're stuck with 90 and we can't get rid of it. Have any of you, if you raise your hand, I can't really see, but whatever. Any of you worked the help desk on January 2nd? He's crying. Yeah, okay. Sir, January 2nd, the entire day, what was the call you got?
I can't get in my computer.
It can't get in my computer because
I
forgot my password, right? Right? People get the time off for Christmas. They go home. They have a couple of drinks. Family comes over. They need a lot more drinks. Then the New Year's, you're like, what the hell? Let's drink again. Come back to work after this large break. You're like, I don't know my password. Now, our users are smart, sometimes in not good ways. And they're like, if only I could just look outside and see my password. Right? Especially here in Provo and Salt Lake. Like, you guys have some beautiful views. Right? You look outside and you're like, hey, January 2nd, I should be skiing on those slopes because it's winter. And then 90 days after that, we have
spring.
Usually the right answer is more winter. But if I ask my 5-year-old, next comes spring, right? After spring, we have
winter.
Sir, I used to live in Minnesota. That's not funny. He said, surprise, more winter. Yes. No, I've had snow, true story, on my birthday in June. It was awesome, actually. Right. And then after summer comes fall. My God, you guys are focused on winter. I think you should move.
Not a lot.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So then, but it could be fall. It could be autumn. It's twice as hard. Now there's a winter this year and there's a winter next year. And your corporate policy makes it, you can't reuse the last 3,762 passwords that you've used. So I can't use winter because there's probably going to be a next one. So, and I need a number. If only there were a number to differentiate this year's winter from next year's winter. And users will sit there for hours contemplating this problem. And of course, they come up with winter 2024, next year 2025, right? Wait, what if we need a secure password? A secure password means a special character. Which character do they hit?
Exclamation point.
Why do we hit the exclamation point? It's the top left character on the keyboard, right? I have a password generator that generates random upper, lower, and number passwords, 20 characters. I could never remember it. And I'll paste that into my banking website when I need to change my password. It's like, your password is the weakest thing I've ever seen in its life. And I'm like, hit the exclamation point. It's like, cool, best password ever. Right? And so like we'll guess things like the season and year. I was doing a test in an organization where I told them I was going to do password guessing using the season and year. And this gentleman told me, Tim, it's never going to work. I got excited. This is the first I'd ever heard of this. And I was like, cool. Do you have how are you shimming Active Directory so that it verifies the path? Like, what are you doing? He's like, no. It's way simpler than that. I'm like, oh, this is going to be profound. We change passwords every 30 days. And I sat there, thank God my filter kicked in. And I was like, well, I'm just going to try the month and year. He's like, oh no. Because what we find is over time, the more you make people change passwords, they typically will go to less and less secure passwords. The first account I got access to, Now, there's two groups in an organization that everyone's scared of. First is IT. We are IT. Who cares? We're cool. We're buds. We're friends. What's the other group we're all scared of? HR, right? Right, we're terrified. Because if you get a meeting from HR, like it's time to call your spouse, be like, I need to find a new job because today I'm getting fired. Also, does anybody understand their health insurance? Because if you did, like, I'm going to hire you to help me because I don't, yeah, right? We get so many, anyways, director of HR, first account. First account, October, I forget the year. And literally a couple years ago, first year, we could have had access to all the personnel information, right? Social security numbers, all those sorts of private information. Imagine the internal phishing from the director of HR. They told us, Tim, that's not fair. I didn't disagree, but don't hate the player, hate the game, right? So we found another account and we use some of those types of things. I've seen season and year, derivations on the password, derivations on the company name. Another nice one is right about now, it's football season. Look at local sports teams. Maybe a number of a player afterwards. That's a great one. I recently went back to school at a school up in Boston. And smart people, way smarter people in the class than me. And they asked us, like, hey, do you want to do a presentation on what you do? And I was like, yeah, cool. So I'm giving the presentation on security. I was like, don't reuse passwords. And they're like, yeah, we hear this crap at work, Tim. And I clicked to the next slide, the entire slide. What I had done is grab the email addresses for everybody that I was in the class with and found all their secure passwords. And I was like, don't reuse passwords. And I just quietly clicked because if you reuse passwords, the room, the air was literally sucked out with a collective gasp because, ooh, one lady, oh my God, that's my, and then she like realizes what she's saying. And I've done this kind of thing for other companies when I presented at security training for them. I was doing one for a company in Portugal, and it was a Zoom meeting. I really wanted to fly to Portugal, but they're like, how about we do Zoom? I was like, how about you fly me business class? And they're like, let's do Zoom. And there's a bunch of cameras on. We flipped to that slide. All these cameras went off. It was awesome. So what we want to do is grab some of those passwords, crack them. Now, if you've got a way to get in front of that, prevent it from being used in the first place, cool. Typically requires extra tooling, but what we could do is take those passwords, do some cracking. Now, you got to be very careful, right? Be very careful because password hashes, especially the NT hashes in a Windows environment, are very sensitive. So we can extract the passwords with something like, with this link here, get a list of the bad passwords, crack those. So this is like season and year, company name, sports teams, other known information. If you've got any sort of subscriptions to compromised passwords, we can add those to the list, crack those, educate, and change those credentials, right? We could use something like Hashcat. We have like a Hashcat developer. Like, are you like sponsored by? Do you like have like a racing shirt? It's like Hashcat. What? Yeah, Hashcat is the best. John is really, really nice. Hashcat is a jerk. Okay, and I mean that the syntax, John, you're like, hey, John the Ripper, a password cracking tool, a little dated these days, but you just pointed at the file, and it's like, cool, I got this. I recognize the file format, and I'll crack it. Hashcat's like, I don't know what to do. You didn't tell me what to do. It's like every IT guy, right? It's like, you gotta tell me explicitly what to do. Fantastic tool, though. We get much more complicated. We can spend a lot more time discussing some of these things, but do some of that basic cracking yourself. Effectively, the service accounts in your environment have no lockout due to a technique called Kerber roasting. And this is actually 10 years ago this month, came up with this. But what we can do is we can request a ticket for a service, and you don't have to have permission to the service. You don't have to have firewalls to firewall rules that allow you to talk to the service. All I need to do is talk to the domain controller, which of course we can all do. I can request this ticket and crack it. Now, how often do people change passwords for service accounts?
Yeah,
This is a real never, right? I have seen passwords that are older than some of the people in this room. Not you, sir, but just joking. Yeah, accurate. Yeah, yeah. Literally, true story. I've seen some really old passwords, and they're terrible. Like one of them, I explicitly remember the account was SQL Engine. The password, guess what it was? SQL Engine 1. Yes, we have a winner. Like honestly, it cracked so quickly. I was like, something's wrong. So what we can do, there's a lot of great tools for extracting this. There's Invoke Kerberos. A lot of the C2 tools have this capability, but we're trying to keep it simple, right? We're a blue team. We're trying to make our organization better using some of these offensive tools. Of course, be careful when you download this. Your AV is going to freak out. So you're going to have to list it so that you can run it. Extract those tickets. Do some cracking. Because people don't change this password, you can crack it for a very long period of time and gain access very commonly to very privileged systems. I've seen very commonly Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server is what kind of a server? Database. What's in a database? Data. This isn't hard, folks. Yeah. So the keys to the kingdom, the PII, whatever important things are already right there, right? The files are in the computer. I've also seen that account very commonly, domain admin. Way too common. So not only is it all the access to that system, but access to pretty much everything else as well. All right? Now, we talked about passwords. Some of you are like, well, why don't you just use MFA? Cool. MFA, though, there's some limitations. Any of you have a vendor-supplied system that you're basically not allowed to touch, or you go out of support? Any of you have a vendor-supplied system where if you look at it angrily, it will crash, and then you're automatically out of support? Like once a year, you have to give it a bowl of fruit to sacrifice to that thing, and then you walk, CrowdStrike, you walk out. You don't turn your back on the server, because if you do, that's a sign of disrespect, and it's going to crash, right? But a lot of those systems, we can't implement some of these additional security features. Or a lot of organizations, Skate is a whole different disaster. A lot of organizations use Linux almost by accident. They're a Windows shop, and they have some Linux servers that they set up because they have to, but they don't have a dedicated team to manage those systems. And they don't have these same sort of things. What we can do is use a tool like MFA Sweep. This is the exact tool that we use. Sweep throughout the environment, find the systems without MFA. If I'm an attacker, if I'm going to guess a password, would I rather try it on the system with MFA or the system without MFA? Now, none of these questions are hard. Without, right? Without. Because once I get it correct, I'm automatically in. And there's sometimes weird bypasses. One of my favorites was if you change the user agent, Microsoft would say, oh, I don't know what browser you are. So the conditional access policy that says use MFA, it's like, I'm not sure if this browser supports it, and it would just bypass MFA. Huh. Yeah, that was cool. Kali. Kali is a hacking Linux distribution. You should fingerprint that one, but whatever. Yeah, okay. This is another awesome tool. This tool is phenomenal. In fact, when this first came out, I was like, oh my God, whoops, wrong buttons. I'm going to be replaced by a shell script. Like, we always joke about it, but it's happening, and I'm like, guys, we can't tell anybody about this tool. There's Bloodhound, another one that's a little bit more friendly for you know what your managers love more than anything else? Dashboards. Yeah, color diagrams, right? Dashboards, Ping Castle, very similar tool. It gives you dashboards on your Active Directory security. But with things like Bloodhound, it works a little bit similarly. This is a little bit, in my mind, a little bit more fun to use. What this does is it builds attack paths. It queries users, groups, nested groups memberships. Sometimes it can even figure out who is and what services are logged into specific systems. And then it builds an attack path. And it literally shows you the way to go from this user to domain admin or wherever you want to go in a nice, pretty picture. Cool thing is, if you run this yourself, it's literally just a Docker container these days. So you just download it and set it up and magic happens in the Docker container. Who knows? It's Docker. Set this up. You can look through some of these attack paths yourselves because the problems here aren't patches. When we have a patch is easy to install, right? Download, next, done. That's all it is. The problems here are architectural issues, structural issues. This means meetings. We got to figure out how to resolve this. A very simple case. We've got the help desk, right? January 2nd, we're resetting passwords all the time. Now, what happens if your domain admin forgets their password? Well, what do they call the help desk? Well, if the help desk can change the password for domain admin, they're a domain admin. And there's many similar scenarios here that when we realize this is going to be a lot of discussion and planning to change. Things you do not want to try to do during an incident. It's just not going to be, it's not going to happen. It takes a lot of time. And the cool thing is, you don't have to hire the expensive consultants to do this. You can do this yourself and replace me literally with your shell script. God, it's even worse. We get this information with what's called an ingester, extracts the information, pulls it into this fancy graph database. As I mentioned, you get the logged in accounts here as well. A lot of things that we see overprivileged accounts, issues with delegation, a much longer subject. I could do an entire talk about delegation, constrained delegation, unconstrained delegation, etc. We've seen issues with users having permissions to change group policy. Someone trying to change even once we become more senior as admins, sometimes you're like, I'm just going to keep clicking until it works. And someone makes a mistake and gives permissions too much to the wrong thing. And the problem is, your traditional vulnerability scanner is not going to find these kinds of things. It takes some effort to kind of piece these things together, build that map, and you're like, oh my gosh, here's this bad thing. That's a configuration issue, not a missing patch issue. Right? Easy for you folks to do. Again, I mentioned Ping Castle. Ping Castle is a lot more dashboardy. It doesn't do the attack path type of thing, which I think is important to look at so that you can find that, for example, the help desk who can change the domain admin's password sort of a scenario. They're both very, very good tools. Highly recommend using some of those. The Bloodhound, since we're sticking with the offense for defense, Bloodhound's more of an offensive tool. We can use some of that, okay? Folks, sharing is caring. I love file shares. Now, I get people all the time that ask, I'm sorry you have to stand there with the camera the whole time. Like, it's all right, okay. Yeah, so the file shares, right? I love file shares. People ask me all the time, they're like, Tim, can I come watch you hack? And I'd be like, I don't want to disappoint them because it's usually me in like my PJ pants and a t-shirt listening to, Taylor Swift or something. Just kidding. Yeah.
Taylor Swift is just no cat.
Yeah. I can't say that. I'd give them the thing. Yeah, so I'm sitting at home, wide monitor, listening to my music, whatever. I know I'm very often confused with, Burst Cryer, the comedian. He's my stunt double. We're both handsome gentlemen, right? If you watch the hacking movies, it's always like, well, I know the back door to this, and it's cool, and there's like multiple things going on. If you've ever watched NCIS, there's two idiots on one keyboard. There's just one idiot on my keyboard. But it's not necessarily that sexy, cool. I mean, I am sexy, but it's not necessarily that fun, cool, sexy thing to watch. A lot of it, I liken what we do to data archaeology. We're sifting through it. We're using big shovels until we get near something. And then we pull out the little brush and we start digging very carefully to find what's underneath. That's our file shares. Far too often on those file shares, and I can almost say this with 100% certainty, there is something sensitive out there. I've seen plenty of times where there's credentials floating around. We just last week had a domain admin credential on a file share that was shared to the entire company. That means the attack path to get to the top is any user to domain admin. And I've seen plenty of other things. I've seen backups of the domain controller, unsecured. I've seen plenty of the PHI, PII, intellectual property, whatever acronym you want to throw out there, floating around on there. And again, it doesn't have to be all the information. It just needs to be enough to be useful to the attacker, or enough to cause a negative impact if you're in the news. And no one wants to be in the news for some of these kinds of things. How can we look for some of this? Well, there's two tools. One of them is PowerView. PowerView has this really awful naming function called find domain, it's interesting domain share file. It's like the longest command you've ever typed. And what it does is it says, hey, give me the list of all the computers, because you can ask your domain controller for that. And then it looks at those computers and looks at shares and then starts digging through the shares and looking for files that say password or confidential or all sorts of other things or certain file extensions. Snaffler, again, similar tool, does the same kind of thing here. It does some of the digging for you. And like I said, this happens. I'm trying to think of I think we had one case that I can think of where we found nothing useful. And of course, there's a wide range here. Snaffler, same sort of thing. This is written in C#. Phenomenal tool, does the same kind of searching. And this is what the bad guys are doing. I know, because if you look at like the MITRE reports or whatever, all sorts of different write-ups on the threat actors, they're looking through this kind of stuff. And realistically, it's going to be kind of hard if they're looking through the main file share to identify deviations, because everybody's hammering the file share, because it's like one job, right? Here's an example. Actually, this is an example. This is Mike on my team, if you want to check out his blog post. But I had a very similar example. I was doing a pen test for an organization, and they were a financial institution where you had to have $20 million you wanted to invest with them, or they just hang up the phone on you. Yeah, and those are the broke people, right? The people at the top are making fun of them like, oh, you don't have a yacht to get to your yacht? Oh, what's that like? Like, do you struggle with gas money too? Right? They only have one jet, so that when their jet's in, right? Like the quantity of money here. And at this organization, I was having, by the way, I set this down here. It's your job to help me remember where I put it, because I'm going to forget here in a minute. All right, so at this organization, it was locked down real hard. No lateral movement, no escalation. The password policy was crazy. And I'm like, man, maybe I should become a sales engineer. Like, I was having a tough time. I'm like considering career changes and stuff. And so I went for a walk. And by the way, a little tip, sometimes the best way to solve a problem and come up with a good solution is by stop trying to solve the problem. Anyway, Scooby-Doo it, right? That's how it works in every Scooby-Doo show. And I came back and I was like, you know what? These security controls at this organization are probably, they're painful for me. It probably means that some of the users are having a hard time too. And I'm like, how are they going to share files? I'm like, you know what? Let's look around. Looked around, and what the users were doing to share files is they were setting up their own file shares. Guess how well they secured them? The answer is keep clicking till it works. right? We allow everyone right access, but that's okay because it's temporary, right? In IT, the word temporary comes from a Latin word that means permanent. And on these file shares, I found bank accounts and routing numbers, all sorts of information. I saw an account where I thought someone had like a cat had stepped on the keyboard. There were so many digits and commas, and I'm like, a human has this much? And I was like, doesn't matter, I'll take it, yeah, right? I don't care if it's Zimbabwean dollars, I still would be thrilled. But when you're talking that quantity of money, let's say one of those accounts was stolen, right? Let's say it was one of the broke people with 20 million. Is there a single person who wants to admit they couldn't retire for $20 million? I think we all could, right? You know what? I'd like to try for a quarter of that, right? I'd be thrilled, right? But imagine as an attacker if they could drain a single one of those accounts. One account, they could live forever. And imagine in a developing country, like their entire village could retire. True story, right? Now, think about it from the company's perspective. They're like, what's one account? But imagine this now goes in the news. Like we had this happen in our organization. The people with that quantity of money, they have people. They make a call like, I don't trust them anymore, move all my money. And like that place overnight is gone, right? This is my hypothetical scenario, but this is a real sort of a risk here. So that's what I say, you don't have to have everything. It could be just those one things, or it could be that one piece that lands you in the news. And this is not the kind of news you want to be in. Thank you. So what to do? Look for those things. Another cool tip for you as defenders is deception. So we talked about Kerber roasting earlier. You could have set up like what we call a honey ticket. This is a service that no user is going to access. And if anybody requests a ticket for that service, you're like, we got a bad guy on the inside. We haven't stopped them from getting in, but now we have an alert that they're on the inside. Similar with the file shares. You set up a file share that no one knows about, and the second when someone touches a file there, you're like, they're calling from inside the house, right? And now we can start looking. Half of the story is prevention, the other half is detection and response. So we can deal with these issues in two different ways here. This is a surprising gift that I did not think would be a gift that keeps on giving. Have any of you ever dealt with Active Directory? Have any of you dealt with PKI? Could somebody explain the math to me? Like I got a math minor and none of you, yeah, okay, good. At least we're all equally smart. So what we saw is, with ADCS, Active Directory Certificate Services, this is Microsoft's PKI, public key infrastructure, that is free, in giant air quotes, from Microsoft. And it integrates with Active Directory. And it generates things like TLS certificates, right? So we can have HTTPS on the inside. It can be used for encrypting email, encrypting your file system. It can be used for authentication. Because it's from Microsoft, it integrates very easily with Active Directory. Unfortunately, we found far too many times that we've had misconfigurations. The fine folks at SpecterOps, by the way, they're downstairs. Go downstairs, tell them thank you for this. They also came up with Bloodhound. This is just a thinly veiled spiel for SpecterOps downstairs. I don't get paid. Maybe I should. Anyway, okay. By SpecterOps, they wrote certified pre-owned. It was a black hat presentation, a white paper. They continue to find new flaws. I can't even keep track of the number of different escalation techniques. I think we're up to like a 16B. I don't even know what the B means in there. We've got escalation techniques, commonly from a regular user to things like domain admin or some other privileged account. There's ways to steal information. We've got persistence. We've got domain persistence. we could spend literally an entire day going through all of these various pieces here. Let's talk a little bit about the ones that I most commonly see that also have the biggest impact. The big two here are ESC1 and ESC3. Again, this is not a patch issue. This is a misconfiguration, okay? Misconfiguration, what we can use, there's a number of tools. There's Certify, Certipi, and Certi. And they all do the same sort of things. They look for these vulnerable templates. ESC1, privilege escalation, the first one. What this allows me to do, and let's take a step back. If you're at an organization and you've got, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users, you want them to automatically be able to request a certificate, right? If we're going to use it for authentication, I don't want to have some poor schlub in IT have to hit OK for every single certificate. That'd be a horrible, horrible, horrible job. So we allow automatic enrollment, which in and of itself is not bad. The problem is, with ESC1, I can enroll, but I can also say, you're going to call me Batman. Right? Yeah, you can call me domain admin. So I'd be like, yeah, I'm Tim, but you can call me administrator. And when I authenticate to a system, the other system's like, Tim doesn't have access. Oh, you're administrator? Cool, come on in. Again, a misconfiguration here. We just had a call with a company last week, and they said, actually 2 months ago, and they were saying, well, this is how our vendor told us we had to configure it. What are ways we can protect this? And I'm like, you really can't. Unless you put something where you make somebody be the certificate jockey who looks at the certificates and manually approves all of them, you're stuck. This is a vendor issue, a significant one. ESC3, this is where any user can change the template. So what we'll typically do is take ESC3, turn it into ESC1. I am now Batman, right? ESC8 is another one for relaying. There's a ton of information here, but these are the big ones that we see here. And again, the tools, Certify, Certify, and Certi, same tools that we use as offensive folks. It's important for you folks to identify these issues because some of this might be long conversations and not just a simple change. And this is definitely not something you want to try to fix during a security incident or during a ransomware event, because you're going to break things in the process of trying to fix and secure things, right? Whoops, get to the wrong slide here. So before ransomware, I'm going to qualify this, according to the Verizon breach report, they should pay me too, but how long were bad guys in our organization before we detected them? 5 or 6 months. You know that password policy of 90 days? That's supposed to make us super secure? That's 2 rotations. At no point is Vladimir in Moscow upset because Karen changed her password. He's like, oh, comrade, we screwed. Karen changed, that's my terrible Russian accent. My typical pen test, 1 to 3 weeks. At no point during my pen test, or even red teams, whatever, have we been hosed because of a random password change. It was going back to someone's point earlier. The modern recommendation is stop forcing rotation. Stop it. It's working against us. Whole different discussion there, and it's given us no benefit. The reason that this number is coming down, in my personal opinion, is not because we're getting better. It's because Vladimir wants to party. Right? They're in our organization. They've ransomwared it. They don't want to wait months and months and months and months to get their crypto and buy a Ferrari. They want to do it this Saturday. They're letting us know they're inside organization. So we have to be faster, we have to be better at preventing, but we also have to be much better at detecting because we're failing far too often with these kinds of things, right? Protection is ideal, detection is a must. We talked about some of the techniques to prevent some of these issues. We've talked about we talked about ways to prevent some of these issues, identify them. We've also talked about ways to detect some of these with some of the honey tokens and some of the other techniques, right? The important thing is, and this is something that we see far too often in security, if something is not 100%, we should get it away. How many of you have ever heard something like that? Like, well, this isn't going to be perfect, so let's get rid of it. That's it? All right, well, next slide. No, but I actually heard, this is a InfoSec luminary, very, very smart gentleman, but a few years ago, he found a vulnerability in some antivirus product. And his recommendation was, well, we just shouldn't use antivirus anymore. And I was like, no. He's like, well, but an attacker could exploit the antivirus. I'm like, yeah, but we can all agree that collectively we're better off with this. In the unlikelihood that someone finds it, ideally be patched relatively quickly, it does make us, of course, a much more secure organization. And when we're designing our defenses, it's always super important to think, what does the bad guy want? I was talking to an organization, they're like, hey, look, your password policy is killing you. But you know that password policy doesn't show up in a dashboard, so nobody cares. What does show up in the dashboard are all the Nessus, Nexpos, Qualys, whatever findings for TLS 1.1 that have no realistic attack vector. The Apache, the PHP version that's running on your systems that has no realistic attack vector because the function's not used. There's no unsanitized user input, not to mention the different memory protections and operating system protections, etc. Right? We need to think about, what are we protecting? They want to build walls around that and tripwires along the way so that even if we can't stop them, maybe we can detect them. And when you start adding some of these deception things in, it makes the attacker question reality. Because they're going to see something and be like, well, this looks juicy, but is it a trap? It makes them slow down. It may make them not take a path because they're like, it's too good to be true, and it is, but they're afraid of it. So if we can change our defenses, not just to prevent, but to detect and confuse, it makes our life a lot easier as security professionals. It gives us more time to detect and respond. So you're summarizing here, as most of you are blue teamers, there's a lot of offensive tools that you can use on your own. They're kind of fun tools, but do say so myself, where you can play with some of the dark arts, if you will. And I only say dark arts because it's crap code, but whatever. You can play with some of the dark arts, find these issues, because these are what the attacker is going to be doing in your network. Lock it down, prevent, detect, confuse to make the organization more secure, right? So look at these common attack scenarios. Look at things like MITRE ATT&CK. Look at the attack paths. Read what the APT groups are doing and pick out a couple of these and like, okay, let's work on this one first. Baby steps. Cool, let's work on this one next. And we're going to add layers here to make it harder over time. And again, the prevention is ideal, but we got the detections, mitigations, and confusion along the way as well. And the goal isn't 100%. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. If we can get a bunch of 75%, kind of tying it back to the beginning, a couple of different 75%ers is way better than the 100% in one category. We start to layer these things and the organization becomes much more secure. Cool. By the way, we have got an entire class on offense for defense, check out training, blah, 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 shameless plug. Cool, questions? Silence. Yes, sir.
What was the website? Again, it's like,
What was the website? redsiege.com/O4D. Good Lord. A lot of slides. Right there. Cool. Other questions? Yes, sir.
anything protected, unknown.
Oh, his question is, do we have any ways to detect unknown unknowns, essential oils? I know. That's a philosophical... dude, you have just ruined my night. Like, I'm going to be sitting on in my house, be like, how could I learn to know what I don't know? But I don't know. God, dude. Cool. So there's another question, I think, somewhere in the back or somewhere. Yes, sir. Whoops. That one. There we go. Oh, yeah. I'll happily stay on the shameless plug slide in any day. But we do pen testing, red teaming, purple teaming. We do security program review, stuff like that. Yes.
After an engagement where you're talking about password, what's your go-to for trying to adopt that and security?
So the question is about insecure passwords and how do we go about doing this? The hard part is I have yet to see a well-accepted security framework that says anything longer than 8 characters is required. PCI says 7 characters.
Okay.
I just yeah, but that's only for certain accounts for PC. Well, yes, and yeah, that's a whole different thing, right? But everything is like 8 characters max. And the hard part is like, cool, we're going to use, that's the policy we're going to use. We're like, yeah, but cool. Why don't we go to the policies, the frameworks that say stop rotating passwords, stop worrying complexity? You're like, that's crazy talk. My recommendation, and this is a sales technique or a sales sort of moment. I say, hey, instead of these crazy complexity requirements where everybody takes an A and changes it to an at, right? It takes an O and changes it to a, everybody knows these tricks to make a secure password. Instead of doing this stupid complexity crap, why don't we just let people have longer, simpler passwords? And it's a trade-off. It's just selling like, hey, how about we do this? And usually the executives are like, cool, I can't remember my password. And I've seen some organizations where they give people 2 options. And they're saying, if you pick the longer password, we're not going to make you rotate it. And you have these complexity requirements, or you can keep the current shorter one. And most of the time they'll self-select for you. But you really have to sell it. Like, what's the benefit? You show them some of the stats. One of the best that I like to show people, it's literally a comic, but there's an XKCD cartoon, comic, whatever, on passwords, talking about like the common substitutions, etc., and how picking 4 random words that are all lowercase is significantly more secure and easier to remember. And I don't have to remember if I change the first O to a 0 or the second O to a 0, and weird stuff like that.
Don't use the one out of head.
And don't use, yeah. So on XKCD, the password is correct horse battery staple. XKCD was compromised. Over 30% of the users of that thing had correct horse battery staple. I was kind of like, not even mad. Yeah. Cool. Other questions? Yes. Is there a way to do that in Active Directory? And I assume you mean pick between the 2 policies? No, you would set up 2 different password policies in group policies, and IT would be the sorting hat, if you will, for Harry Potter fans. Yeah, cool. What else? Yes, sir.
It's better to memorize. Yeah.
The question is, would it be better to memorize random passwords if you could do so? Yes. But for like 99.99% of the population, no, right? The password manager is going to be better for a lot of that. Yeah, cool. One last question. No, I said we're going to stay here until one of you. No, I'm just kidding. Cool. Thank you so much for coming. I greatly appreciate it. Yeah. My name is Tim Medin. If you've got questions about this, just email me, tim@redsiege.com. That's my account. Hit me up on the Twitters or whatever the heck they call it these days, LinkedIn.